Hi, this is Wayne Yeager, and this is the LeanChair Assembly walkthrough video. We're going to put together a LeanChair in this video, and the obvious first step is step one. We're going to connect the backrest assembly to the lower frame tubes. Now, the backrest assembly comes pre-assembled in a plastic bag, and that's in the larger box that we ship you. And the first step, obviously, is take the plastic off and put it cushioned down. And then we're going to go and get the lower frame tubes, which will be foam wrapped, and they'll have the number 1 on there. And that's kind of the protocol we use for the whole thing, which is to, whatever step something is used in, it'll have a sticker or a number on there somewhere telling you the step. And the first part of this is to take box 1, open it up, and grab some of these long bolts. Put a washer through them. Or put them through the washer, rather, and then put them into the holes that are appropriate for your height. I go into great detail about that in the manual, but as a default, I usually use just the first 2 holes. So then we put those black spacers on, and then push it through the lower frame tube here on the left side, and then add a washer and a cap nut, which you'll note are smooth on the outside to prevent snagging. Again, add a washer and a cap nut. And at this point, it's mostly just about hand tightening them. We'll have plenty of opportunities to go back later and tighten these up a lot better. But for now, just hand tightening is okay. So once you're done with this left side, you move over to the right side. Again, from box 1, because this is step 1, you grab some of these 5.5-inch long bolts. You'll put the washers through them, or rather put them through the washers, and starting from the inside or the center of the LeanChair going outward. A couple more spacers, and then the right lower frame tube is attached, just like it was on the left. You know, there's a lot of, the tolerances are very low on this, for a good reason. It has to be. And so there's a little manipulation required sometimes to get these bolts to go through the holes. Sometimes you'll have to screw them in. But they'll go with enough motivation. Give them a loving tap if required. Now, also in box 1 is a little wrench that we send you, like that, and a hex key, which we paint red so that we can just easily refer to it in later steps. Just grab the red hex key, for example. So here I am. I'm tightening these things up, let's call it 80%. And that's just to prevent them from wobbling as we go on to the next steps. There will be an opportunity, as I said, to tighten these up a lot later. And actually, you do want a little bit of wiggle room during the next few steps as the additional parts are added. Step 2, the gussets. These large outer gussets go on the outside, and the inner gussets go on the inside. And you'll see on the table there on the left there's box 2 that I've opened, and that's all the parts that you'll need for step 2. And just like before, the bolts start at the inside and go toward the outside, and then these little cap nuts are put on. These bolts do not require washers. The gussets more or less act as a washer. And once you got the left side on, to do the right side as well. You put the outer gusset on the outside and the inner gusset on the inside. The bolts go through the center toward the outside. And they get capped off with a little cap nut. Now I'm going to turn it over in order to do the wheels. There's two little wheels that go on the ends of these outer gussets just to make it easy to roll LeanChair around once it's upright. And everything you need is going to be in this little plastic bag that comes in box 2, which is 2 shoulder bolts. And I'm picking up a shoulder bolt there, pushing it through the wheel. A little metal washer. It goes on the outside of the outer gusset, and then there's like a little serrated nut that goes on the inside. Same deal with on the other side. You take a little shoulder bolt, put it through the wheel, add the little washer, poke it through the hole going from outside in, and then the nut goes on there. That little nut is serrated, so it holds it in place really well. And the little hex key goes into the end of the shoulder bolt, and it's quite easy to tighten that up. And even after you've given it a good snug, the wheels will still spin. Same thing on the other side, and that's it. Now for this next step, we're going to flip it over, and we're going to add the legs and the leg connector. And that's actually the final part of the LeanChair frame assembly. So, like just as before, you're going to need to go get box 3 and open it up. And box 3 will have all the parts you'll need for step 3. And then you'll grab some of these legs. These legs are identifiable because they have a threaded insert on one end. And they'll be marked with a sticker, number 3 sticker, so you'll know they're used in step 3. Same deal as before, you're taking these little bolts, run them through from the inner gusset toward the outer gusset, and putting a little cap nut on the end. And this is why you don't tighten up those gussets beyond hand tightening, because you've got to get those little legs to go in between those gussets. Okay, this is actually the leg connector. This part is it can be tricky, but it's pretty simple actually. You just poke that bolt from the large hole through the small hole, and then use the yellow hex key that comes in box 3 to tighten those up. So it tightens into the insert. Again, we're going to take the yellow hex key, put it into the end of a small bolt, go through the large hole into the small hole, and then it goes into the insert, into the leg. And then you tighten this up. Now, if you lose the bolt while you're doing this process, you can always pop the little plastic tube cap off the end and fish it out. It's not a problem. It's just a little tedious, but yeah, give these things a really good tighten, because you're not going to come back here and retighten these later. So I'm giving it a really good forceful tightening there. And then when I'm done, you put these little plastic hole covers on. So now it's time to give everything a really good tightening. I start with the long bolts that we inserted in step 1. The long frame bolts that connect the backrest assembly to the lower frame tubes. And I would say at this point, I'm tightening at about 90%. Maybe a little bit more. Obviously, we'll come back, and it's important to keep everything super tight on the LeanChair. So we'll be coming back and tightening them a lot more. You don't want to eliminate the ability to sort of wobble it, because part of the process is actually getting at the end, is to get into the LeanChair, kind of like rock it back and forth a little bit, just let everything sort of fit into place, and then go back and retighten. So we don't want to tighten it completely at this point. But again, we don't want it to be loose. So I would say about 90% tight, if that makes sense. It's like very snug, but it's not giving your all. I think you get the point. I would normally fast forward through this kind of thing, but I think it's kind of important to see me do this in real time. Okay, on to step 4. We're going to flip it back over and attach the footrest and what I call the leg rest. The footrest comes in a plastic bag in the large box. So just take the plastic bag off, and it rests at the bottom of the lower frame tubes next to the gussets for now, for assembly purposes. The mat has enough friction, it'll just sort of hold it in place while you go and fetch the parts from box 4. Which are these. So the parts that you'll need for this step are these little black spacers that go between the outer gusset and the footrest. This bolt goes through the outer gusset, through the spacer, into the footrest, and out the side, the internal side. Same thing on the right. I find it easier to squeeze the little, sorry about my arm, but I found it easier to squeeze the little spacer between the outer gusset and the footrest and then push the bolt through all that till it comes to the other side. And on the inside of these, on the end of the bolts, you get these little lock nuts. Now, lock nuts are a pain to tighten because they have a nylon insert intended to keep them in place. And so anyway, you use the small hole in the double wrench that gets sent in box 4, and using the yellow hex key, cinch it up. Now, the thing about lock nuts is once they're on, they're not coming off, or it's going to be difficult to come off. So you don't really need to give this 100% tightening. In fact, you probably don't want to do that. I would say, again, more like 90-95% tight, because you do want the footrest to be able to move up and down, as I demonstrate here. And the adjustment shaft, which is also found in the large box, you just put them in the teeth of the outer gussets, and that's how you can adjust your footrest angle. Now, the second half of step 4 is adding the leg rest. Starts with these cushions, which come in the large box. We're going to add this leg rest bracket. Open up the little plastic bag. It has all the parts you need for the leg rest bracket, 4 screws and 4 little black plastic cap nuts. Poke the little screws so that the threads are facing up, and then cover them with the little black plastic cap nuts. You don't need to tighten the cap nuts because we're going to remove those here in just a minute. And the only reason we're putting them on now is to hold these little screws in place while we put the bracket onto the cushions. There are maybe kind of hard to see in the video, but there are 4 holes at the top of the cushions, or the pair of cushions, which you will then insert these bolts into. The first 2 are pretty easy, And then you kind of need to squeeze the cushions together a little bit to get the last two in. As you can see, I'm pulling that toward me to kind of squeeze them together. It's not a lot, but just it won't be perfectly centered unless you do a little bit of a squeeze, and that's on purpose. And once the 4 bolts are in, you use the hex key that's painted light blue to tighten them up a little bit. Now it's time to build the leg stay assembly. This is what keeps the cushions in place when you want them to be parallel with the backrest. Of course, you can also swivel them out of your way. And the way you do that is first you put a plastic washer down, and then the leg stay, another plastic washer, the leg connector, and then we'll go through it step by step. The plastic washer, the leg stay, another plastic washer, the leg connector, the leg stay connector. Oops. Right, that washer came out. Okay, so it's washer, leg stay, washer, leg stay connector. And again, you'll need to squeeze the cushions together a little bit to get that knob to go in there. I'm glad that actually happens, so you can see that, assembly can be a little chaotic and a messy process, but just make sure you use all the parts. And then once I've got the leg stay thing connected, I'll go back with the light blue hex key and tighten the bolts back up. And everything you need for this process is in box 4. Now I remove the black plastic cap nuts temporarily because it's time to put the leg rest assembly next to the backrest assembly, and it goes through these little plastic hinge holes. It goes through pretty easily. You just kind of have to fish it through, and then once it's through on one side, you can attach the cap nuts. And then you can reach around and fish it through the other side. It's not hard. It's just a little bit, tedious. First time you do it. I've done it 100 times, so it's pretty easy, but it can take some time to get it right. This step is easier with the leg stays. The leg rest stays up. But once you're done, you can unscrew the knob and lower the leg rest stays so that it's in proper position. Now, step 5 is we're going to assemble the headrest. You'll need the 2 headrest tubes that are labeled with a 5 sticker and the number 5 box, which contains the parts you'll need, which is a knob, a swivel plate, and a little plastic bag of screws. Oh, and you'll also need the headrest, obviously. The headrest is in the big box, and everything else will be in the small parts box. So you put the small tube through the swivel plate from the back side, open up the plastic bag, and you're going to connect that swivel plate onto the headrest using these screws. That short headrest tube has a little ball joint, as you can see now, at the end of it. So once it goes to the little swivel plate, that's what gives you the little joint that allows you to move the headrest around side to side and sort of around, up and down. At this point, the headrest is actually upside down. I'm just showing you, I'm doing it that way so you can see me screwing the screws in easier. Okay, so I've tightened it a bit, but not completely, so that you can move that little swivel joint around. And then that assembly that you just created goes through the vertical adjustment tube, which is the longer of the headrest tubes. It just slides into that little square. You've got to raise the knob up all the way before it'll do it, but once it's through, yeah. So then you insert it into the headrest tube receiver in the back of the backrest assembly. And the headrest itself goes between the cushions, allowing you to raise it up and down as needed. You take the little knob, and there's a threaded, there's threads there in the backrest assembly that allow you to connect that to the headrest. And these two knobs are how you actually adjust the headrest height and the in and out function, which I'll show you now. So the top knob loosens the pressure on the in and out tube, the small headrest tube. So you can push it in, push it out, get it exactly as you want it on that axis. And then the lower knob releases the vertical or the longer headrest tube. So that lets you set the height of the headrest. So that's the end of part one, and you're going to go on now to part two. But before you do, you'll have to decide whether you want a right desk, a right swinging desk like the one shown here, or if you want a left swinging desk like that one. And once you decide, just go to LeanChair Assembly Part 2, and then pick right or left.